Talking season hit its pinnacle at SEC Media Days in Dallas, Oklahoma's first appearance, of course, along with Texas. Appreciate you being here at OU Sooners Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Thank you for your patience. We had some technical issues, but we are ready to roll. We got Jason Ray here, and Jason responsible for the bulk of the 148 shows to date. Jason, good to have you here as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me as always, Mark. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we will get started on SEC Media Days. So, of course, we know what the deal is. Everybody's optimistic. Everybody likes their team. Everybody fill in the blank. It is like spring training in baseball or pick your sport. There's always going to be optimism. But did you come out with anything of meaning through all of it with Brent Venables and the players?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of good stuff that came out of it, Mark. I mean, just interesting to see. I think just the metamorphosis of Brent Venables in terms of how he has presented himself, presented his program since day one to how he was this week at SEC Media Days was interesting. I mean, I think the one critique of of him that he's had just in terms of his speaking appearances and that he started from is he tended to go a bit long. Right? I don't know that I would necessarily say he rambled, but he would tend to go on and on and on. But that was not the case this week. He was I believe there was, I can't remember. I think it was Hugh Freeze may have been the one that did not speak as long. But Brent Venables of all of the coaches, besides Hugh Freeze, spoke. His opening statement was the shortest of all. So which I think was very interesting. But just kind of taking some of the comments he made, Mark, it seemed like he was trying to kind of toe the line between having immense respect for what the SEC is going to bring from a challenge perspective, but also having confidence in his team, having confidence in what they're going to be doing heading into the SEC. I think one of the quotes that he'd said that we're running into the SEC, we're not tiptoeing in, we're not we're not nervous, we're not scared, we're not intimidated about coming into the SEC, which I think is a good. You've got to be able to toe that line between not coming in here and then wide-eyed and intimidated, but also respecting the challenge that the SEC brings versus where Oklahoma has been in the past. So I think that was good just from his perspective. I don't know if this is, it's probably not newsworthy at all. It's kind of silly, I guess, but there was a lot of talk about horns down being a penalty. The Big 12 has been pretty clear over the last few years that that it was gonna be a penalty, and then um, it was essentially stated by the lead official there at the SEC that unless someone just really gets up in someone's face and is doing it, they're not going to call a penalty on it. It's just going to be fair game, which I love, and not just from an Oklahoma perspective. Alabama did this, I think, after the game after they beat Texas a couple years ago. So I think it's cool to see that we're not taking things too serious. It's still a fun game at the end of the day. But I think just I guess the biggest sentiment that I would say that I think there's a lot of skepticism in terms of Oklahoma at the line of scrimmage. I know Saban mentioned it a couple of times. Just how's Oklahoma going to be able to compete at the line of scrimmage, particularly on the offensive side, but defensively as well. So I think that's going to be the big thing. We talked about this last week, and I think it's going to continue to be the big thing, Mark, that Oklahoma has to guard against and play against is how will they be able to compete at the line of scrimmage in the SEC.
That was definitely a theme, and the theme of SEC venues, and that being brought up
Mm-hmm.
both to the OU and Texas side, but also to the rest of the SEC to say, what is OU and Texas? What are they in for? Can you explain to them? I was hearing questions of players and coaches that were completely unrelated to OU and Texas, not even on the schedule that they were
Mm-hmm.
being asked. Somebody was working on their column, but about the venues in the SEC and the shock of being surrounded by 100,000 people that are as rabid as they are.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There was a very comical um, interview question with Jackson Arnold, specifically talking about that, and he had mentioned over the summer he had spoken to Carson Beck about Jordan-Hare Stadium, and Carson Beck basically told him that's that stadium is cursed, right? And so I think cursed from the perspective of I think it's such a much tougher environment than most people will give it credit for. And I think this was one that we talked about last week specifically, Mark, that Auburn may not be necessarily quite as good this year as they've been in the past, and certainly last year not as good as they've been in the past. But ask Alabama how tough of an environment it was last year, right? They almost knocked them out of the playoff hunt. So yeah, and you're right. I think there's a lot of conversation about the venues, and I think on one side of it, it's kind of funny. Like Oklahoma and Texas have played in big time environments, right? Both of these schools are blue bloods. It's not anything out of the ordinary. I think when you look at this conversation, not just from a venue perspective, but just holistically, I think that the challenge is going to continue to be week in and week out, going to these venues, playing against these teams, which is something that I think it's just going to both teams are probably going to have a little bit of struggles understand like really conceptualizing what that looks like. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, the venues are incredible in the SEC, and I think that the fan bases are probably more rabid in the SEC than they are um, across the country to a certain degree. So yeah, I think that'll be very intriguing to see, and then that'll continue to be a little bit of the narrative I think coming into to this season, especially for Oklahoma and Texas playing some of these teams that they haven't played in the past, and even for other SEC teams coming into Norman, coming into Austin. I've talked to several people that are really excited just to play these incumbent SEC teams just coming to play Oklahoma and Texas. So
I'm not selling this as some kind of exhaustive research to prove a point, but take this for an example. At Jordan-Hare Stadium, first of all, this team lost 7 games last year. They were not a very good football team at Auburn, but they had Alabama on the ropes. 4th and 32, 4th and goal from the 32, should have won that game. If it's
hmm
reasonably defended, they beat Alabama. They knock Alabama uh, out of the playoff. Georgia, that ball game is tied with 4 or 5 minutes left. They're tied with probably the most talented team in the country with 4 or 5 minutes left, and they only lose by a touchdown. If you look at the last decade of Alabama games, I've done this. You could probably go back further and further prove the point. And again, I'm not saying this is exhaustive research against everyone. So I gave the snapshot of 2023, but the last 10 Alabama games, every game. So the last 2 times they've had Alabama at Jordan-Hare Stadium, they just flat out should have won the game. And it's not one of those deals that it was a tough game, it was well fought, and they just happened to lose the game. No, it was like they blew the game. The season before the 2021 game, if a runner doesn't run out of bounds, they run out the clock and win the game. And again, Alabama goes to the playoffs because Auburn just, you know, pulls a boneheaded play and their running back runs out of bounds and gives Alabama the ball back. Otherwise, they beat Alabama, a playoff team, at home. So they beat Alabama in 2019 at home. They beat them at home in 2017. And all their other losses to Alabama in the last decade at home were excruciating losses. So that's how they performed against Alabama at home. Jason, at Alabama the last decade, they've lost by an average of 4 touchdowns.
Yep.
That's the difference between home and road, at least for Auburn against Alabama and Georgia.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think, when we talked about the schedule last week, Mark, we talked about for Oklahoma just to have the season that they want to have, anywhere from 8 to 9 wins. Um, this is a game that you circle on the calendar that you say that Oklahoma really needs to win that game, right? With the schedule that they have, particularly the latter half of the season. But no, you're absolutely right. But I think and you've got to expect that players and the fans there's obviously a little bit of a different juice between New Mexico State and Alabama, obviously, right? And I think that was the interesting parallel last year when Auburn lost 31-10 to New Mexico State and then turned around and did exactly what you'd mentioned. But yeah, and you've got to expect this is early in the season. Oklahoma's coming. They will have just hosted Tennessee the week before, and then they go to Auburn. First SEC road game, and this is the one that you get. I think you'd like to have a little bit more of a warm up, but again, I think it's the most interesting thing is I think the narrative, and I don't know that this is all the way across the board. Um, I think it's one of those things, Mark, where the Oklahoma fan base is not quite sure how to react to what's coming. I think there's a lot of comparisons around Auburn, like, okay, it's not that difficult of a place to play. This is not a great team. This would be comparatively going to Kansas or going to BYU or something like that, just in terms of team talent overall. But I think it's going to be maybe a little bit of a shock from a fan perspective that I think maybe the undervalue of the SEC is happening just to a certain degree. Um, but yeah, I mean, I can't wait to watch these games. I can't wait to get it started, because it's gonna be great football to watch. But yeah, Auburn's gonna. I don't have their. I know they play California in the non-conference, but I don't have their schedule in front of me. But they're gonna be amped up. Their crowd's gonna be amped up for the new blood to come to Jordan Hare.
I have not been to a game in the Big 12. I have been to, if we count all sorts of neutral site games, I've been to 5 or 6 different places in the SEC. The thing I'll say is I'm not going to challenge which conference has the more rabid fan base, but if you just look at it this way, let's say the crowds are just as rabid. I know it's difficult to go to Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Iowa State when they're playing well and they're amped. They can get loud. BYU is a tough environment. After that, I think it diminishes quite a bit. But off the top of my head, I might be missing somebody, West Virginia. But if you just equate the difference and say the fan bases are just as rabid, you just equate 55 or 60,000 people at most of those venues to 90 or 100,000 Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, off the top of my head, all those places are in the 100,000 range.
Yep.
And Auburn is probably in the 80, 85,000 range off the top of my head. It's just going to be a bit different of a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the one thing that might be a little bit of a benefit for Oklahoma against Auburn is the fact that I believe this is going to be an afternoon game, and it may not necessarily matter, but night games, are a little bit inducing of a better overall environment. But like you said, it may not matter. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and I don't mean to discredit the Big 12, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but like the environments from the Big 12 versus what's going to happen in the SEC is night and day. I mean, I think it's like when you look at Group of Five going to a Power Five or Power Four, I guess now. Um, that's the change, and so I think it. Like I said, I think someone said this in the that you have it up there. I think it's good. I think for Oklahoma that they get this out of the way early. They get this environment, understand what this is going to be like, because I mean it's going to be a similar experience at Ole Miss. Maybe not to the degree of difficulty that Auburn is, but then Ole Miss is a much better football team coming into this season than what Auburn is, right? And then late in the year, potentially, I mean, you could argue the best home field environment in all of college football in Death Valley at LSU late in the year after Thanksgiving. So, yeah, I think it'll be one of those things that will be fun to watch. Like I said, how Oklahoma handles these environments, particularly with a young quarterback. Right early on, you've got his first, played the Alamo Bowl, which was obviously a neutral site game, but this will be his first game on the road as a true sophomore. So just with that and the offensive line, it'll be very, like I said, very interesting to see if Oklahoma can get off to a really good start heading into Dallas.
I'm going to skip around, Jason, to a few just random observations before I hit you with this question. One would be you mentioned Brent Venables' uh, propensity to expound at the podium and talk quite a bit, and Oklahoma media has to be pretty appreciative of that overall, because he tends to give you more than what you asked for, which is a good thing. It was just kind of funny because Shane Beamer was, I believe, the first SEC coach. I know he was on the first day. Um, so I had seen a headline when I went to go watch. I watched as many of the coaches, didn't get to all of them. Surprisingly, I had Vandy at the bottom of my list, but I tried to get to all of the SEC head coaches to see what they had to say. And when I looked for Shane Beamer's online after the fact, I mistakenly, because I had seen a headline talking about how long he went on, like 39 minutes or something, that
Hmm.
I mistakenly grabbed the previous year's recording and figured it out within 30 seconds to a minute. But then I discovered that for 3 consecutive years that Shane Beamer has had the longest address at SEC Media Days, and also that he noted that he was told that he did the year before and that he was going to do something about it. And one year he said that his kids had said something to him like, can you hold it down, Dad? We don't want you having the longest speech again. And he's done it 3 years in a row, and is, even with the acknowledgement that he keeps doing it and trying to correct it, he still does it again.
That's very funny. Yeah, I'd remembered. I hadn't had a chance to watch all of them, but yeah, I remembered his was either the longest or very very much up there with the longest. So, yeah, that's very funny and interesting to see.
And of course, a lot of his question and answers had to do with Brent Venables, them working together, the Oklahoma connection, how special it's going to be for him to go to Oklahoma. And you hear out of a lot of coaches, most coaches in those type situations, when that type of question is raised, just says, okay, it's about the players. This is just another game. It's my job. It's a business. They don't state it like that. But we're on a mission. This is our task. We don't think about that. We go in and we do the job. And I don't have time to think about all those things. But he was very authentic and forthright to say, yeah, it's going to be special. It's going to be different. I'm going to be thinking about my time at Oklahoma. A lot of memories are going to come back. It's going to be different. So I credit him for at least being very forthright about that. Uh, Jason, I also noted in going from coach to coach is that the Oklahoma media, they descended on Dallas, or maybe they were just more aggressive than everyone else. It seemed as though every other question came from Oklahoma media. And so there were a lot of Oklahoma angles presented to these coaches because the Oklahoma media was passionate and very focused on uh, getting their say in these SEC media days.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I noticed that as well, and I think it just kind of speaks volumes to the level of excitement that there is around here with with something. This has been there. Oklahoma has been unhappy. I think it's fair to say in the Big 12. Over the last few years, heading into for heading into the SEC, even prior to this announcement, I think that there's been a lot of kind of discernment within the Big 12 locally by Oklahoma. Probably Oklahoma has been a little bit more vocal about their displeasure um, than maybe even than Texas, and I think it really has it's kind of stemmed from Mark, I guess something a little silly, a little inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, but the biggest from fans, media, and even inside the program is just the sheer amount of 11 a.m. kickoff games that Oklahoma got, right? And so I don't know how many when the schedule came out. Um, I think Oklahoma has two games scheduled to kick off before noon. The SEC hasn't provided the exact times and all the schedules, all the games throughout the year, but they've given the window, right? And Oklahoma only has one, I think, two. I'm sorry, two windows that are noon and before. One of them's at Ole Miss, and for the life of me, I can't think of the other one. And even the Texas games at 2:30 this year, which is historically 11. So I take that back and say that there's just been so this has been multiple years coming, and so I think there's just an incredible amount of excitement. And I don't think it's from an expectation perspective, right? I mean, we've been on here for years and years, sometimes talking about the excitement and the expectations for Oklahoma is, to win a conference championship, to play for a national championship, like these types of things. And it's not that. It certainly is not that. At least from the realist of fans, realist of kind of media members. But I think it's just the new adventure that is embarking, and there's tons of, like I said, there's tons of excitement coming in. A lot of questions for Josh Heupel about you'd mentioned Shane Beamer as well. A lot of questions for Heupel about him coming back to Norman, which will be very fun to watch for him. Was sort of a obviously a big time fan favorite when he was um, here as a player. Had some a little bit of rough spots within the program, but I think the hatchet has been buried as far as that goes. So he was very complimentary, very excited in his comments about coming back to Norman. So yeah, it'll be it. I think you're right. The Oklahoma media was there, and a lot of I echo the same things that you saw. A lot of questions surrounding that, and I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if um if the coaches and the players on the SEC at some point they just kind of get tired of this. Okay, like we get it. There's new teams coming in, but is there going to be a point where they're going to get incredibly tired of hearing this? And just one thing that I'd noticed that I think raised the eyebrows of a few um, Oklahoma fans, but I don't really think it was anything derogatory. They had asked um, LSU defensive linebacker Harold Perkins about Danny Stutzman, and he'd said, "Who is he?" And so and he further qualified that comment and said that he focuses on him. He's focused on the offensive guys, and things like that. So he doesn't really, pay attention, so to speak, to the defensive side of the ball. But I thought that was very kind of comical in terms of where where some Oklahoma people took that as a slight, which I don't really think that it was.
I don't think so either, because I think that it's different than when the Michigan players said something about TCU. I can't remember the statement, but it was that was more of an egregious slap in the face, like didn't even know what conference they played in or something like that.
Right.
But in terms of these players, I think we just all have to understand that some of them are fans of the game. Like they grew up watching, like we watch, and really into it. And then they continue to be fans of the game, meaning when they're not playing, they're watching other teams, even if they have nothing to gain from it, nothing to benefit. They just love watching. So they know players. And of course, these guys get recruited together and they build bonds and they go to camps. And so you have some interaction that way, social media and all those things. But then you've got other players that they're just athletically gifted. They just played football. They don't watch football. They didn't watch football growing up much, except to maybe learn something, but they weren't fans of the game. And so they're just various levels of interest outside of their own responsibility and their own team. So absolutely, I don't know that that can be read into at all. Jason, I'll say that I went to Big Ten Media Days last year. Uh, I covered 6 or 7 consecutive SEC media days back in the late 90s into the 2000s when it wasn't quite the spectacle that it is now. But at Big Ten Media Days last year, it was similar to the setup at SEC Media Days, where the coach hits the podium in front of the entire room. And then there's a side session later when you can hit up the coach for more questions. But still, regardless, if you get a question in, then you've pretty much accomplished something, because there's only maybe 6 or 7 questions with 100+ media people when they're at the podium. Maybe I'm underestimating that total. And then even on the side session for the headline coaches in the Big Ten, there were 80 to 100 people surrounding Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day. And so to get a question in is difficult. So I was fortunate enough to ask 5 or 6 questions. But I'll ask you this. Uh, the the level at which you can ask questions at SEC Media Days is one thing. But let's say you are able to sit down with Brent Venables, players of your choice, maybe even other coaches around the SEC and other players, and you could have an actual sit down with them, discussion. You're at lunch, nothing gets recorded. You get to ask them whatever you want, no holds barred. It's a real conversation. What would you ask Brent Venables and anybody else you'd like to talk to?
Interesting question. I mean, I think I would just, what are your realistic expectations for this year? What's a good season for Oklahoma this year? Because I think there's a lot of, um, when you think about Oklahoma as a whole, just historically, right? Like 8-4 is not a good season. Like, heck, this is 8-4s are the reason that Gary Gibbs got fired, right? And I know this is years and years and years ago, right? Like we're dating ourselves here. This is over 30 years ago. But things haven't changed, right? And so I think I wonder two things. Now, what's a good season? Do will the fan base? I think probably so, right? But would the fan base be happy with an 8-4 season? I mean, or would it be one of those things where, okay, 8-4 is okay, but we need um, a double digit win season the following year. So I think just um, realistic expectations. I think would be one. Um, Maybe is the job harder than you thought it would be, or is it easier, or is it about what you expected? Specifically with him being a first time head coach. Interesting to see um, what that looks like for him. So, yeah, I think those are some of the questions that I would ask. I mean, I think when you players would probably handle that question a little bit differently than Venables would, right? I mean, players are always optimistic, especially early on in the year. That they're going to say that we've got a chance to compete for a championship, for a conference championship, and make the playoffs. But yeah, what that realistic expectation, and what do you consider a good season?
Yeah, because I often think of that in terms of you either get the answer that we're playing for championships, we play for the best, we play to be the best, or that's a little bit too far down the road. Maybe we got to focus on the next day, the next practice, the next rep, um, that sort of conclusion. But yeah, I think on one hand, some college football fans, many college football fans, have the mentality or the mindset or look at this as though the Nick Sabans, Urban Meyers, those kind of level guys are the ultimate winners, competitors, will do anything to win. They're obsessed with it. And that for the guy that has a 50 or 60 winning percentage, that because they didn't achieve at that level, that they're not as strong a competitors. And I don't necessarily think that's always the case. I just think circumstances and skill set and ability to lead and all these things, but in terms of being a competitor and wanting to win just as badly as anybody, I'm not going to pin that on anyone that the coach at Purdue or the coach at Kansas or the coach at Stanford or pick your school isn't as competitive as anybody else. I just don't know if they have the wherewithal themselves or have been surrounded by the resources to get it done. Um, so to have that much competitive nature, to want to be the best, to desire to be the best, but to know logically that you don't have that opportunity. You're at South Carolina this season, you're at Mississippi State, you're at Arkansas. Like, how do you balance that mentality showing up at the football facility every day and you have just as much drive to win as Nick Saban, let's say, but realistically that you don't have that opportunity?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. No, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I caught, that I knew this, and I think there's been a little bit of a misleading narrative at times that's basically said, "Oh, Venables was handed the keys to the Porsche." Well, that's not necessarily the case. Like he'd mentioned that within his first, I think he said within his first 15 months that they lost, and this is just a mind-boggling number. They had lost 75 scholarship players in 15 months. So, I mean, while it's not anywhere near a full rebuild, right? But when you think of a roster turnover of that nature, then that kind of speaks volumes to the challenge that Brent had coming in here. And so I think there's a couple of things that I think about when you look at maybe this year and even beyond, for for Brent. I know he just recently got a contract extension, which is fantastic. Now I wonder what will the fan base again consider consider good, right? I mean, I think Oklahoma made a huge leap from where they were, 2 years ago. Just barely making the bowl game and finishing 6-7, 6-6 during the regular season. But then last year, obviously a big step up, 10-3 overall, 10-2 in the regular season, with just the two close losses that they had to Oklahoma State and Kansas. And so that's one thing. Um, Bowl win. I mean, I think it would be good for him to get a bowl win. I don't know that in the grand scheme of things, I don't know if that really matters all that much anymore. Specifically if it's not a college football playoff bowl win, but still, if they fire off, and I think I've said this, when we talk, I think 8-4 is kind of the dividing line. I think 8-4 is a good solid season. 9-3, I think, is a great season for Oklahoma this year, right? Because we talked about those games. If you're 9-3, you've probably beaten. If you go 9-3, you've probably either beaten Alabama at home, at LSU, at Ole Miss, probably one of those three games, at Auburn, one of those three or four games. So at least, but I think if it's a 7-5 or 6-6 thing, then I think there's going to be some questions whether or not is Oklahoma really ready to be in the SEC. Is Venables the guy that's going to be able to move them, um, you know, in that category? And I think it doesn't really get talked about a lot when you kind of think about this season, but Oklahoma, not only is there those are there those questions on the offense and defensive line, Oklahoma's ushering in two new coordinators, right? Zach Alley coming in from Jacksonville State, which is, I don't know if you've heard him talk or listened to him at all, Mark. Like, he is Brent Venables 2.0. Like, he is just Venables mentored him when he's at Clemson, did a really good job at Jacksonville State last year. And so I think for what Venables has done over the last couple of years, he's had so much like input on the defense, and whether or not anyone wants to admit this, he's been calling plays the last 2 years. But I think he's going away from that. He's letting him. So there's a lot of familiarity. It's not like they're installing a brand new defense for one. And then on the offensive side of the ball, Seth Luttrell taking over for Jeff Lebby as an offensive coordinator. Very similar, right? I mean, obviously Venables didn't have his nose into the offensive side of the ball as much as he did on the defensive side, but Seth Luttrell's very similar in terms of what they're going to run versus what Lebby ran. I mean, I don't think you're going to see as much. They probably won't go as fast. They might even huddle a little bit, which is interesting. Seth Luttrell will slow it down just a bit more, than and probably have a little bit more, dedication to the run game at times. That kind of so. I think the hope and I think the thought prevailing is that Levy and Bill Bedenbaugh were a little bit. I don't know that I would say at odds, but wasn't really um, wasn't really the offense that Bill Bedenbaugh loved, and so Seth Luttrell and Bedenbaugh are very very much attached at the hip, and so I think there's a little bit more with that. But yeah, there's a lot of with those two things, ushering in a new quarterback going into the SEC. There's a lot of new things, a lot of new challenges to navigate. But yeah, that I still, like I said, that 8-4 line, I think will be interesting because Oklahoma's done a very good job recruiting here in 2025. But you know from a recruiting perspective, I think you're going to want to have a solid season in year one to get those guys to think, okay, maybe they're not quite there yet at Alabama's level, at Georgia's level, maybe even like LSU historically, those types of teams. But they had a solid year one, and that's a good building block moving forward.
Before you brought it up, I was going to make the same statement about 8-4 and 9-3, and you gave it a little bit more depth with the analysis of the schedule. I was just going by just feel that
Yeah.
that 9-3 just feels like, from the reasonable fan, that was progress. That was an accomplishment. We played in a really tough league, and we came through it at 9-3, which would be 5-3 in the SEC, you would think.
Yeah.
Sparing some monumental upset, of course, but 5-3 in the SEC versus 8-4 is 4-4. And sure, it's not going to be calling for Brent Venables' job by any stretch, but that 9-3, and again, to a certain extent, for people that look into it a little bit deeper, it depends how it looks. Of course, if they go 8-4 and they lose 4 nail biters, then to anyone really wanting to evaluate the performance of the program and the progress made, then that should be taken into consideration, and then there could possibly be a quote unquote weak 9-3 if they just get completely exposed 3 times. Is not going to look good. So save those two ends of the spectrum situations. I do believe that 8-4 is acceptable. 9-3 would be an accomplishment.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and as there's no point of comparison for this, but if you go 9-3 in the SEC, very likely you're a playoff team, right? But to your point, if the 3 losses are by 17 to 24 points or more each, then maybe the narrative is a little bit different. But just thinking about it, 9-3 probably get you to the playoff in the SEC, particularly thinking about what Oklahoma's schedule does look like this year. So, and not to say that 7-5 is a bad, like an awful year. Let's not. I mean, in the SEC year one, I don't know that that's necessarily considered an awful year, but I mean, it's probably, if just using your logic, which I agree with, 7-5 probably means 3-5 in the SEC. Right. Even though some of these non-conference games aren't necessarily pushovers, like 2 of them are, Temple and Maine, right? But then Houston and Tulane isn't necessarily like a gimme, right? Um, but I think most people think that if Oklahoma drops one of these non-conference games, then um, it's not going to be pretty the rest of the way. But yeah, and I think it means so much going forward. Obviously, 8-4, 7-5 doesn't really challenge for an SEC title. It doesn't challenge for a playoff spot, but it just puts you in position, and you have a better grasp and understanding what the life in the SEC actually looks like. And so, and don't get me wrong, even if Oklahoma throws out a 6-6, 5-7 season, I don't think anyone's necessarily calling for Brent's head. Now, I will say, if that were to happen, then I think the confidence would be waning just a bit, and what he would be able to do. But yeah, I think that from a momentum perspective, you'd love to be in that 8-4, 9-3 range.
I'd like to hit on this comment here real quick, because I think our guy Caleb hits on something that's a little overblown, and I'll point out some reasons why. Have you heard anything yet that OU will claim unclaimed titles in football? There's a few: 1915, 1949, 54, 73 SEC standard rule book. Well, I'll say this, Caleb. I know that that's a common thought out there that every SEC school claims every possible national championship that it can. However, let's be fair and let's not take groupthink here. Let's not take that path, because you've come to the right place, Caleb. We review national championship seasons here at the Voice of College Football and do it the smart way. We look at the results and we go through the metrics of the season and so forth. Actually, I reviewed every Alabama national championship, and this is what I came up with, Jason. They have 18 national championships, and yes, they've claimed a couple that are completely ridiculous. They had 2 losses and 2 ties one season, and why they claim a national championship, I have no idea. I don't even remember when that was. It was sometime in the 30s or 40s. But they have 2 other times that they could legitimately claim national championships. So once I went through and reviewed all of them, I determined they have the right number of national championships. Auburn actually could claim more national championships legitimately. They've got like 3 out there that they could claim, and they don't. And actually, Caleb, this is interesting. I just came across this the other day, and I was jumping on our Michigan fans for this. Not that it's their fault, but on Michigan, I was jumping on Michigan because I was having some fun with this one, Jason. Listen to this. The first forward pass in college football was thrown in 1910. And in 1913, they finally put some reasonable rules to a forward pass. But before that, if you threw a forward pass and it was incomplete, you gave up the football, number one. So if it's first down, you throw a forward pass and it's incomplete, you give up the ball. Number 2, you've got to throw the ball 5 yards, at least 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Like your quarterback or whomever it is at the time has to be at least 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage. And then on top of that, you can't throw the ball more than 20 yards. And then the next rule is you can't throw the ball in the end zone. Well, under those conditions, who's going to throw a forward pass? So it was completely discouraged from throwing forward passes. So nobody did it. So what I found interesting was, before there was any semblance of modern passing rules in football, Michigan claims 4 national championships. Now, how you, in any kind of justifiable way, claim national championships before you can even throw a forward pass, I think is a bit ridiculous. It's not even the same game. But what I found out in going through that there are services out there that name Penn State to 2 national championships, Auburn to national championships, LSU to national championships. And you know what? They don't claim them because they don't believe that they're justifiable. So I'll give them some respect for not claiming national championships before you could even complete a forward pass. So actually, the SEC could claim some other national championships.
That's wild, Mark. I guess I didn't realize the specific rules around the forward pass. Like, can you imagine if something like that was around today in the modern in the modern era? That would be
like, do we really legitimately recognize a national championship from 1901 versus one that was just won last year or 10 years ago, when you couldn't throw a forward pass? Half your schedule was against intramural teams, basically places we wouldn't even recognize today. It's just what I did was I went back to 1869 because that was the first quote unquote college football game, Rutgers and Princeton. And I went through Wikipedia and I went through every season to see, okay, at what point can we really determine this is a legitimate college football season? Because the very first season, Jason, there were 2 teams and they played each other twice. And that's the season. Princeton and Rutgers, and they played twice. And Rutgers claims a national championship for that. So like it's a good 40, it's a good 50 years practically. Yeah, it's a good 50 years before you can really look at it and say, okay, there's 40, 50 teams playing, and they're playing 10 or 12 games, and they can throw a pass, and it's really a legitimate sport, as
Mhm.
opposed to, Princeton and Harvard claiming all these national championships, and Michigan, when there's like 14 teams playing and they're playing 5 games, and it's just, is this really legitimate?
Right. Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. I mean, I think maybe the 50, and I'm trying to remember, I believe the 73 season for Oklahoma was the probation season in which they went
Yep.
undefeated, but they weren't eligible. So yeah, I mean, I think that one is certainly one, and I'm trying to recall 54 if that was kind of a similar situation. But yeah,
Caleb, we're gonna look through those, Caleb.
yeah.
We'll look through
Um,
those.
but yeah, I'm with you on the 1915 one. Yeah, that one's let's not discuss that because of
I
the
think they squeeze in after the modern passing rules for 1915, so we could look at
yeah
that.
that's true.
They
Yeah.
just make it. So before we go, Jason, if you could hit on this announcement that's coming up for a recruit on Saturday.
Yeah. Defensive lineman for out of the Miami Central area, Miami, Florida, for Oklahoma, Floyd Ricard is going to make his announcement tomorrow. It looks like from all angles that this is going to be an Oklahoma commitment. You follow the crystal balls, and they've been kind of flowing from not only local Oklahoma guys, but local Miami guys, from even from some of the national guys as well. He's rated as a 3-star. I believe he might be a 4-star on 3 or arrivals, but from a 247 perspective, he's a 3-star guy. So, but he's been heavily recruited by other areas. Miami, Oklahoma has been battling Miami, USC, Alabama, among others for him. So, unless there's some sort of um, something unexpected, then I think he'll be Oklahoma's, and then I think Oklahoma's going to look forward to Fasusi. Made his announcement. He's going to commit here in August, I believe August 21st, if I remember correctly. But I think that's the one that Oklahoma's looking for. He's a 5-star guy, another big time talent. Looks like he dropped his final 5, but it seems to be more of an Oklahoma versus Texas battle for him. But yeah, Oklahoma's still continuing to do. They're in the top 10. I haven't looked since we talked last, but number 6 overall last week, but that may have dropped just a bit. I know Alabama's had some big time commitments here over the last little bit, but yeah, that'll be good to look for Oklahoma for Ricard this weekend.
Here's the deal, folks. Jason and I are trying to get together every week, and we believe we'll be able to do that. We can't promise that for sure, but we are doing our best to get together every week. What you need to do is please subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications, and we will be sending out a notification to let you know when we're going live. So it could be any day of the week, sometime during the day, most likely in this noon, late morning hour for you. So again, don't know exactly when it's going to be, but we want to do our best to talk Oklahoma football once a week. So we would love for all of you to be here with us. So again, please subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. That way you know when we will be live. Jason, appreciate you being here. As always, have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll make it on back next week.
Yeah, you too, Mark. My pleasure.